Today in sports, we won!
This is Ivana Reyes, reporting for ICBS. I'm reporting here on location in the Halls of Rhetoric with George A. Kennedy, the author of Comparative Rhetoric, an historical and cross-cultural introduction. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy, for joining us today.
I'm pleased to be here today.
In your book, you discuss and compare rhetoric in non-literate cultures such as social animals, Aboriginal Australia, and North American Indians. Then in the second half of the book, you look at literate cultures starting in the ancient Near East, traveling through ancient China, ancient India, and finishing in Greece and Rome. Why did you write this book?
I want to do a cross-cultural study of rhetorical traditions as they exist and used to exist in different societies around the world. My objectives were to use comparative methods to identify what is universal and what is distinctive about any one rhetorical tradition in comparison to others. Drawing on my first objective, my next objective was to formulate a general theory of rhetoric that will apply in all societies. Then I wanted to develop and test structures and terminology that can be used to describe rhetorical practices cross-culturally. And my last objective goes beyond my present undertaking, but I hope greater historical perspective may be useful in understanding how cultures other than our own have come to view conventions of discourse.
In the first chapter, you talk about social animals and rhetoric. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not heard a speech from an animal or been persuaded by an animal.
In Darwin's The Descent of Man, he revised the third chapter, entitled Comparison of Mental Powers of Man and the Lower Animals. In the chapter, he identified the existence of species of animals that exhibit emotions and mental power. The ability of social animals that live in groups to understand, reason, and communicate with each other, mostly with members of their own species, and sometimes with other species, has been extensively studied by biologists since Darwin's time.
So how do you know what's rhetoric when it comes to animals?
A good example would be during mating season. Every fall in the Rockies, red male deer stage loud vocal encounters to persuade other red deer to back away so they can get down with the ladies.
So they have a shouting match to get each other to back off?
Pretty much! And the one who roars the loudest and longest usually wins and persuades the other deer to kick rocks.
So what if there's a tie?
Well, then they have a walk-off, where one will pace in a right angle meters away from each other to further persuade the others to leave. And if that does not cause either to leave, then they will fight antler to antler. This is where it gets exciting. This behavior during mating season falls under the traditional Western concept of deliberative rhetoric.
So a peacock fanning his feathers while strutting around a female would be rhetoric, because he is trying to persuade the female he is ready to go and prettier than the other guys?
I did talk briefly about peacocks in the chapter. He's saying, "How you doing?" to the females and "Get your own" to any male present.
A few chapters later, you talk about North American Indians and how eloquence and wisdom played a huge part in their oration. This concept I've heard before from that one Roman guy.
Oh, you mean Cicero.
Talking about Cicero? Oh, Ivana, how's it going? He's my boy. Hey, relax. Jesus.
Okay. There's a reason he's in sports.
Cicero definitely believed in the union of eloquence and wisdom, and believed one without the other was useless. Native Americans were considered to be savages, yet they used rhetoric as a civic means for the tribe instead of personal gain. Once they had to deal with the early settlers and the conflicts they had with the early settlers, their rhetoric held European rhetorical features, especially when they appealed to Christian values. Some of the speakers were Christianized themselves.
Not savage at all, huh? In the second half of the book, you deal with cultures that had written language. You looked at ancient Near East, ancient China, ancient India, and Rome and Greece. I was really interested in the chapter about ancient China.
Chinese rhetoric, in the earliest text, was conservative, even reactionary, aimed at consensus, and sought to reaffirm social and political hierarchies. Speeches were addressed to individuals and small groups instead of the mass audiences.
In the chapter, you compare Confucius to Socrates.
Confucius died 10 years before Socrates was born, so they lived around the same time period. Confucius and Socrates showed hostilities towards rhetoric as practiced in their own time. Both men were skilled rhetoricians, and they both aimed to draw a line between the teaching of others and what they regarded as true wisdom.
Alexander the Great and his Greek army referred to the Brahmins of ancient India as sophists, didn't they?
Yes, they did. The Brahmins were a priestly class, and they became the intellectuals and teachers of their time. Because of this, they ranked themselves as the highest rank in a class system. This class system still exists today. They used rhetoric to maintain their positions by coming up with a concept of reincarnation and said that a reincarnated person comes back in the next life to the same class that they were. They argued that an individual is born and will stay in their class. Reincarnation worked conveniently for them because it kept the low at the bottom and the high at the top.
So basically they argued to stay in their positions of power while telling others that they needed to stay in their own class and place. Man, that's shady. I see why Alexander and the Greeks called the Brahmins sophists.
Exactly.
The last chapter talks about ancient Rome and Greece. Wait, hold on folks. I'm getting a report right now. We have a breaking news story. There is an ancient Roman man running amok in a public park. Let's go live to the scene.